Hello and welcome to another episode of In Short. My name is Robert Urbaschek, and today I will be talking about the COP26. This is the climate conference that took place in Glasgow last week. And what I want to talk about today is briefly the good and the bad that the conference has brought, as well as what people say about it. I will talk about that in a little bit. And then I will talk about where we go from here and was it successful in stopping climate change and so on. So before I begin and put my timer on the board, I will briefly put on a video clip which should raise some questions. Because what I have heard in the media, at least in Western media, is that this COP was a huge success and that we, for the first time, mentioned coal in an agreed upon text, and that it is the first step to finally start addressing this crisis. So if that is the case, how is it possible that other people say things like this?
I had a speech prepared to deliver in relation to the cover decision, but frankly, I know it's going to fall on deaf ears, so I won't bother. The richest have ignored every moral and political call to do their fair share. Their broken promises are littered across 26 COPs. Empty press releases drafted by polluting companies no longer fool anyone. COVID vaccine equity and net zero 2050 are just the latest examples of deliberately sacrificing the poor for profit by those whose wealth was and continues to be looted from the global south. Whilst we are frustrated and angry, we are not without hope. We know it's ordinary people who change history, and we will change history. The era of injustice is over, Chair. We will uproot these systems of oppression with our global Green New Deal to guarantee everyone the right to live with dignity and in harmony with our planet.
How is that possible? How is it possible that we are in that situation where there's two sides like this? Well, what this man is referring to is basically that you could see it go awry from the outset. There are all kinds of restrictions on travelers in the UK, as well as in the Netherlands, where I live. And these restrictions apply to mostly unvaccinated people. Now, people from the global south, which means people from outside the West, for the most part do not have access to vaccines. Quite low percentages of these populations have been vaccinated, which means that it was very difficult for them to travel and to get into this conference. So, before I get into all that, let's start the timer. And let's begin this breakdown of COP26. Okay, so first a quick breakdown. What is the good that the conference brought? Well, 1.5 degrees warming remains theoretically in reach. You can hear the doubtfulness in my voice, but I'll get into that later. Secondly, there have been some more or less concrete resolutions regarding deforestation, and there have been some agreements regarding the financing of climate adaptation, again, especially for the global south, very necessary. It is still by far not enough, but it's a beginning. You could argue it's a beginning. And the third good thing that I wanted to add, which maybe is reason for hope, is that public pressure appears to be moving the needle, appears to be moving our leaders to take bolder action. Again, it's probably not bold enough, definitely not bold enough, but at least it seems to be having some effect, and public pressure is still mounting. Okay, so I said the good, I already said a few bad things, so let's put the bad on there as well. There are no concrete agreements. There are no plans, no roadmaps, nothing binding, nothing to make sure that nations stick to their lofty promises and goals, and no internationally agreed upon transparent way to even measure whether these goals have been achieved. And that remains the biggest problem with these conferences. Until there's actually a legally binding international agreement, it is very difficult to hold countries and governments to account. Okay, second point I wanted to make is net zero. That is a term that is getting bandied about more often now, especially during this conference, and that is one to watch out for. Because what does net zero carbon emissions actually refer to? It is not zero carbon emissions, so it doesn't mean no carbon emissions at all. But take, for instance, an oil company like Shell. They could purchase a huge forested area, which sucks CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then claim that the bottom line, when you add up all the emissions that they cause and subtract the forests that take up emissions, that the bottom line is net zero. But we have seen with all the emission trading schemes over the past decades that these things really do not work in driving down emissions and are actually a way to, greenwash is the term, are actually a way to present yourself as being very sustainable and helping protect the earth while you're in fact just doing business as usual. So I wanted to have a closer look at the text because that is very important to keep in mind. What is the exact text that has been agreed upon? And I wanted to highlight especially this sentence, that they have agreed to accelerate efforts towards the phase out of unabated coal power and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Now, what does that mean? So accelerating efforts, so increase their efforts to phase out unabated coal power. Okay, unabated coal power. So not coal entirely, just unabated. This could mean, for instance, with carbon capture, maybe still emitting it, but then sucking it out of the air, or maybe it could refer to the most inefficient ways of generating power. No one knows, and that is the thing. There's a lot of leeway, a lot of room there for interpretation, a lot of loopholes. And the last part is inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. So again, not getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies, but getting rid of the inefficient ones. And yes, coal has been mentioned there, as has been touted as a great success, but gas and oil are nowhere to be found. And I'm pretty sure that most scientists agree that fossil fuels, for the most part, need to stay in the ground if we want to have any shot at achieving 1.5 degrees warming, or staying below that. Let's be accurate here. It's staying below 1.5 degrees, because beyond that, it is very risky for our human society. So, the main crux, where do we go from here? Well, it is too vague. There is too much room for interpretation. It is not concrete enough. There are no plans. That is the one thing that has never been addressed over all these years of climate conferences. And the other thing that bothers me is the way that more ambition, that is what I hear in the Western media, that it could have been more ambitious, but the countries like India and China did not want it to be this ambitious. Whilst that is more of a result of the fact that the West does not want to help them finance that transition. They don't have the means to transition as quickly as we might have. And this is especially true for even poorer nations. So I don't think that is a fair representation at all.